The summit of dreams. Ethan Carter had always dreamed of adventure. As a boy, he would spend hours flipping through books about explorers in far-off lands, imagining himself scaling mountains, crossing deserts, and sailing unknown seas. His favorite dream, though, was standing on the summit of Mount Everest, gazing down at the world from its highest point. Now, at the age of 32, Ethan was finally making that dream a reality. After years of saving, training, and planning, he had joined an international expedition to climb Mount Everest. The team consisted of climbers from all over the world, each with their own reasons for taking on this monumental challenge. There was Priya, a seasoned mountaineer from India who had already climbed 6 of the 7 summits. Luis, an engineer from Brazil who wanted to honor his late father, a climber himself. And May, a photographer from China who dreamed of capturing the untamed beauty of the Himalayas. The journey began in Nepal, where the team spent weeks acclimatizing to the altitude. The trek to base camp was grueling but awe-inspiring, with towering peaks, roaring rivers, and villages filled with warm-hearted Sherpas who supported their climb. Ethan marveled at the strength and resilience of the Sherpas, particularly Dawa, their guide, who had summited Everest 6 times. Dawa's quiet confidence and deep respect for the mountain made Ethan feel both comforted and humbled. At base camp, the reality of the challenge set in. Nights were freezing, oxygen levels were low, and the wind howled relentlessly. Yet, the camaraderie among the climbers kept spirits high. Ethan and his teammates shared stories around the campfire, laughing and dreaming about the moment they would reach the summit. But the mountain had its own plans, and nothing about Everest was predictable. As they ascended, the challenges grew. Crossing the Khumbu icefall felt like walking through a labyrinth of towering ice blocks and crevasses. Every step required focus and courage. Ethan nearly turned back one day when his leg slipped into a hidden crack. But Dawa pulled him up, his grip firm and reassuring. "The mountain tests your will," Dawa said. "But if you respect it, it will guide you." When the team reached Camp 4, also known as the Death Zone, the air was so thin that even breathing felt like a monumental task. It was here that Ethan faced his greatest test. A fierce storm rolled in, forcing the team to wait for 2 days in the freezing cold. Supplies ran low, and tension filled the camp. May's fingers began to show signs of frostbite, and Priya's lungs struggled with the altitude. Despite the odds, the storm finally cleared, and the team began their final push to the summit. It was a slow, agonizing climb. Ethan's legs burned, and his lungs screamed for oxygen. But his determination burned brighter. Step by step, he pushed forward, the summit growing closer with every breath. Finally, as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Years had passed since Ethan Carter had reached the summit of Mount Everest, but the fire of adventure still burned fiercely within him. The climb had changed him in ways he hadn't fully realized at the time. It wasn't just the thrill of standing at the top of the world that had stayed with him. It was the deeper understanding of the human spirit and its ability to push beyond limits, even when everything seemed impossible. Since returning home, Ethan had become a source of inspiration. Speaking at conferences, sharing his story in schools, and even writing a book about his experiences. But despite all the recognition and accolades, he knew there was more to accomplish. His eyes had always been drawn to the icy, mysterious expanse of Antarctica, a place where few had ventured and even fewer had returned unchanged. It started as a small thought. What if I could explore the most remote, uncharted places on Earth? He had heard of a team of researchers who were looking for volunteers to join a scientific expedition to Antarctica. Their goal was to gather data on climate change, study the unique wildlife, and explore the vast, frozen wilderness. It was a project that not only intrigued him but spoke to a deeper calling. Something beyond just climbing mountains. This was about discovery, preservation, and contributing to a cause far greater than any personal adventure. Ethan made up his mind. He would join the expedition. The preparation for the Antarctica expedition was far more intricate than his Everest climb. Mount Everest had tested his endurance and physical strength. But Antarctica would test his resolve in an entirely different way. The cold was unbearable, the terrain treacherous, and the isolation absolute. Before departing, Ethan underwent months of training to prepare for the extreme cold, for sub-zero temperatures, and gaining the necessary knowledge about the fragile ecosystem he was about to witness. When the day came to board the plane, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of a vast unknown once more. As the plane took off, he watched the world shrink below him, and for a brief moment, he felt the familiar rush of excitement mixed with apprehension. Antarctica wasn't just a place on a map, it was an untouched wilderness. A land that had remained largely unknown to humankind for centuries. The flight was long, but the sense of anticipation made the time seem to fly by. As they neared the icy continent, Ethan could see the vast stretches of white below, interrupted only by jagged mountain peaks and the occasional glimmer of water between the ice floes. The vastness of it all was humbling. Upon landing, the team was immediately struck by the eerie silence that enveloped them. The wind howled across the icy expanse, but there was a stillness in the air. A quiet that seemed almost unnatural. The researchers, led by Dr. Sarah Griffin, an environmental scientist, were there to collect vital data on climate. The researchers, led by Dr. Sarah Griffin, an environmental scientist, were there to collect vital data on climate change, especially the effects it was having on the fragile ecosystem of the Antarctic Peninsula. Ethan's role was primarily to help with the logistics of the expedition, assist with climbing and surveying remote locations, and document the journey. They set up camp at a research station that had been in operation for over a decade. The station was equipped with all the necessary tools for surviving the harsh conditions, but it was clear that they would still need to be extremely careful. They had everything they needed for survival: specialized clothing, heating equipment, and a supply of food. But the real challenge wasn't the logistics. It was the mental toughness required to survive in such a place. The endless white landscape, the isolation, and the constant biting cold would take their toll, and it would require every ounce of strength to keep going. The first few days in Antarctica were spent adjusting to the extreme cold and setting up their research equipment. Ethan was assigned to a small team that would be climbing a ridge to gather ice core samples, critical pieces of data that could provide insight into the Earth's climate history. As they made their way up the icy slope, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the landscape. The mountains were towering, and the glaciers stretched for miles, their frozen surfaces cracked and gleaming in the pale light of the Antarctic sun. But the beauty of the place was deceptive. The weather could change in an instant. One moment, they were in clear skies, the next, a blizzard swept in, reducing visibility to nearly zero. Ethan had learned to never underestimate the force of nature in places like this. The cold was so intense that it could freeze your skin in minutes if you weren't careful. And the wind was unforgiving, howling across the landscape like a living thing. One night, as they camped on the ridge, the wind picked up, making it nearly impossible to sleep. The howling sound outside the tent was deafening, and the cold seemed to seep through every layer of clothing. But Ethan didn't mind. There was something strangely comforting about the wilderness, its harshness, its remoteness. It was as if it was reminding him of his place in the world. There was no noise, no distractions, just the pure, raw energy of nature. Weeks passed, and the team made significant progress in their research. They collected valuable data on the ice sheets, gathered samples from previously unexplored crevices, and studied the habits of the unique wildlife that called Antarctica home. The penguins, seals, and whales were fascinating to observe, their survival in such an extreme environment a testament to the resilience of life. But there was a growing concern among the researchers. The ice was melting at an alarming rate, and they had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of climate change on the fragile ecosystem. Ethan had always believed in the power of nature, but what he saw here was something different. It wasn't just the raw power of the land, it was its fragility. The ice, which had stood for millennia, was slowly disappearing. The research team had recorded alarming signs of accelerated melting, and the implications were far-reaching. If the ice continued to melt at the current rate, the effects on global sea levels and ecosystems would be catastrophic. Ethan felt a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about adventure anymore. This was about preserving the planet for future generations. The expedition had taken on a new meaning for him. It was no longer about proving something to himself. It was about contributing to a cause far greater than his own ambitions. As the team wrapped up their research, they were faced with the reality of leaving Antarctica. It was hard to say goodbye to a place that had both challenged and inspired them. The ice was still there, but it was melting, slowly but surely, a silent witness to the changes occurring all over the world. Ethan stood at the edge of the ice shelf, watching the sun dip below the horizon for the last time before they boarded their return flight. The quiet of the land was almost overwhelming. He thought of the people he would return to, the work that awaited him, and the greater mission of protecting the environment. For the first time in his life, he felt as if he had truly touched something larger than himself. Climbing Everest had been a physical and emotional test. But Antarctica had given him a new perspective, one that he would carry with him forever. The plane soared into the sky, leaving the frozen continent behind. Ethan looked out the window, the vastness of the land still fresh in his mind. He had found something in Antarctica that he hadn't even known he was looking for. The true adventure, he realized, wasn't just in reaching the highest peak or surviving in the most extreme conditions. It was in understanding the delicate balance of the world around us and doing everything we could to protect it. As the clouds parted and the sun broke through, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The world was full of unknowns, full of challenges. And he would keep searching, keep exploring, for as long as he could. Ethan returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. The lessons of Antarctica stayed with him, driving him to advocate for climate change awareness. Climbing Everest had tested his limits, but Antarctica had shown him the fragility of the Earth. Now, his greatest journey was not to distant lands, but to inspire others to protect the planet for future generations.